My mother sneered that I wasn't worth a seat at her table, handing me a $5 million bill to pay my way back into the family. I just smiled and called for the owner, my fiancée. They tried to erase Gray Whitmore at 32, but they didn't realize I already held the keys to their kingdom. Now, as I stand alone, the noise of their betrayal is finally replaced by the peace of the heights. The Houston skyline stretched out beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows like a vast field of electric diamonds. At 32, I had learned that the view from the top is often quiet, a stark contrast to the noise of the world below. I stood there, the amber liquid in my glass catching the fading light of a late autumn evening in 2025. For a long time, the city was my only companion. I wasn't the drifting boy my family had once discarded anymore. I had built an empire in the shadows of Texas tech and energy, a silent titan whose name moved markets, while my face remained a mystery to the tabloids. My success wasn't born from a desire for revenge, but from a necessity for survival. Character, I've realized, is what you do when the world thinks you have nothing left to give. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Inside lay an heirloom diamond ring, its brilliance softened by the dimming light of the room. It felt heavy, not just with the weight of the stone, but with the weight of a promise. This ring was for Elowen. She was the woman who had seen my worth when my own blood chose to be blind. She didn't fall in love with my bank account. She fell in love with the man who spent his weekends volunteering at the local shelter, the man who still remembered how to work with his hands. Looking at that ring, I understood a fundamental truth. Love is not about possession. It is about providing a safe harbor for a soul to grow. The silence of my apartment was shattered by the sharp vibration of my phone on the marble counter. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The rhythm of the buzz felt like a ghost from my past. It was Eileen, my mother. I swiped the screen, reading the text that felt more like an order than an invitation. Gray, we are celebrating a new milestone tonight at L'Eclipse, 7 p.m. It's time we acknowledged your new job. Don't be late. Your father expects you. I stared at the word job. She probably imagined me in a cubicle, filing papers for a modest salary, completely unaware that I could buy the building she was sitting in with a single wire transfer. A sharp sting of condescension radiated from those words, a familiar ache I'd carried since childhood. Yet, a memory flickered in the back of my mind. A rainy afternoon when I was 7, and she had stayed up late to fix my favorite toy. I clung to that small shard of kindness like a lifeline. I decided right then that I would go. Not out of weakness or a need for their approval, but because the ultimate test of a man's heart is how he treats those who have failed him. I wanted to give them one last chance to be a family before I stepped into a future that would no longer include their shadows. Before leaving, I opened a secure, encrypted app on my phone. The data pulled up instantly. Vanguard Manufacturing, my father's legacy, was drowning in $15 million of high-interest debt. My father, Reginald, was a man of pride, but pride doesn't pay interest rates. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last year quietly acquiring that debt through an anonymous holding company. I owned their past, their present, and if I chose, their future. They lived in a world of vanity and polished silver. I lived in a world of cold, hard reality. It's funny how pain becomes the thing that finally wakes you up. I arrived at the lobby of L'Eclipse 20 minutes early. The air was crisp, smelling of expensive perfume and damp pavement. As I approached the entrance, I spotted Baldrick's bright red Italian sports car parked illegally at the curb, a loud, vulgar display of a wealth that was currently evaporating. My brother always did have a penchant for the theatrical. Just then, a legal courier hurried past me, clutching a briefcase embossed with a firm's logo I recognized too well. I caught a glimpse of the top document as he adjusted his grip. Urgent. Vanguard debt restructuring. Final notice. The timing was too perfect to be an accident. My pulse quickened, a steady, rhythmic thrum in my ears. I stepped into a quiet corner of the lobby and accessed a private server. For months, I'd kept a digital ear on the family's group chat, a defensive measure I'd hoped I'd never have to use. The messages from 10 minutes ago scrolled by, and my blood turned to ice. "Make sure the hostess keeps him standing," Eileen had written. "Once he feels small enough, we'll present the papers. He's the only one with a clean credit history left. He'll sign to save the Whitmore name. He's always been the soft one." The celebration was a setup. I wasn't being invited to a dinner. I was being invited to a slaughter. They wanted to use my hard-earned stability to bail out their reckless vanity, and they intended to humiliate me into doing it. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the cool steel of my watch against my skin. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but boundaries are the gift you give your future. I had walked in here hoping for a reconciliation, but I found a battlefield instead. Have you ever trusted someone you shouldn't have, only to find the truth tastes like ash? I looked at the elevator doors, the polished brass reflecting a man they didn't recognize. I wasn't the boy who cried in the hallway anymore. I was Gray Whitmore, the man who held the keys to their kingdom. I realized then that I wouldn't be turning back. I would walk into that trap, not as a victim, but as the only person in the room with the power to decide who gets to keep their name by the end of the night. I had spent years being the one they forgot. Tonight, I would be the one they could never forget. I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a heavy metallic ring that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. As the floor numbers began to climb, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't hurt. I was simply ready. The hunt had begun, and the people upstairs had no idea that they were no longer the ones in control. My heart beat in a steady, cold rhythm as the elevator climbed, because I knew that by the end of this night, I would finally be free. The elevator doors hissed open, releasing me into a hallway of polished obsidian and muted gold. L'Eclipse didn't just sell food, it sold the illusion of being untouchable. I adjusted my tie, feeling the cold weight of the ring box against my chest. Every step I took toward the private dining area felt like a descent into a theater of calculated cruelty. I could already hear the rhythmic clinking of silver against porcelain and the high, practiced laughter of my sister Jocelyn. They were already seated, a unified front of Whitmore elegance that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. I wasn't greeted with a smile. I was met with the heavy, intentional silence of a family that had already decided I was a stranger. As I approached the table, the reality of their setup hit me with the force of a physical blow. There were 5 of us, my parents, Baldric, Jocelyn, and myself. Yet the table was set for exactly 4. Baldric looked up, his eyes flickering with a predatory gleam as he slowly placed his designer briefcase on the only empty space beside him. I stood there, a man in a navy suit standing over a table that had no room for him. It was a rehearsal for my erasure, a systemic isolation designed to make me feel small before the real work began. The hostess walked past me twice, her eyes averted, clearly instructed to treat the youngest son as an invisible ghost. "Gray, you're hovering," Eileen said, not looking up from her salad. Her voice was like silk wrapped around a razor blade. I looked at my father, Reginald, hoping for even a flicker of the man who used to take me fishing, but he kept his gaze fixed on his wine glass. A man's worth is not determined by the seat he is given, but by the integrity he carries while standing. I chose not to argue. I chose to be the calm center of their storm. Looking back now, I should have seen that their silence was actually a confession of their desperation. Real power doesn't need to bark to be felt. It just waits for the right moment to act. "We thought you might not make it, given your busy schedule at that little firm of yours," Jocelyn giggled, her diamonds catching the light as she sipped a vintage Bordeaux. Baldric made a grand show of checking his luxury watch, a heavy gold piece that I knew was currently being used as collateral for a loan he couldn't pay. They were performing a play of wealth while standing on the edge of a cliff. I remembered a time when this version of them would have made me beg for a chair, but that boy was dead. I had outgrown the need for a seat at a table where the main course was betrayal. Eileen finally set her fork down and slid a leather-bound folder across the white linen. It moved slowly, coming to a stop right in front of my hands. "Since you want to be part of this family so badly, Gray, it's time you started paying your dues," she said, her smile never reaching her cold eyes. "Consider this folder your ticket to the table. Your father is tired of carrying the weight alone." The atmosphere in the room turned suffocating, the air thick with the scent of lilies and old money. I knew this wasn't an invitation. It was an ambush. I had been invited to a dinner just so they could hand me the bill for their survival. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the documents with the practiced speed of a man who had spent a decade reading the fine print. It wasn't just a bill for an exorbitant meal. It was a legally binding personal guarantee and debt assumption agreement. They wanted me to assume personal liability for a $5 million high-interest bridge loan that Vanguard Manufacturing had defaulted on. My sharp eyes caught the predatory lending terms. terms that would legally enslave my financial future for the next 20 years. They weren't asking for help. They were trying to bury me under their failures so they could keep their post-oak mansion. "Sign it, Gray," Eileen sneered, her voice dropping the mask of motherly concern. "This Conrad will make you a VIP in this family. It's a small price to pay for the Whitmore name. Unless, of course, you'd rather be a stranger to us." I looked at the pen she held out, a gold-plated instrument that felt like a dagger. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. My mother had just placed a price tag on her love, and it was exactly $5 million. I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me, the kind that only comes when you realize the person you were trying to save is the one holding the shovel. I looked at Reginald, who finally met my eyes with a gaze full of cowardice. He knew this was wrong, yet he sat there and let his wife and eldest son try to destroy his youngest. I didn't feel rage. I felt a profound, heavy sadness for the ghosts they had become. Character is what you do when you think no one is watching, but I was watching everything. I took a deep breath, the scent of the rain-drenched city drifting through the vents. I understood then that I didn't need their seat, because I had already built my own house. I simply closed the folder with a soft, final thud that echoed in the quiet room. "I won't be signing this," I said quietly, my voice steady enough to make Baldrick flinch. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of Houston traffic 30 floors below. Eileen's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She hadn't expected the soft one to say no. I didn't realize it then, but that moment of refusal changed everything. I was no longer the son who could be manipulated. I was the creditor who held their lives in his hands. I looked toward the entrance of the restaurant, where a familiar, elegant figure was walking toward us with the grace of a queen. My fingers grazed the edge of the leather folder one last time, a silent goodbye to the family I thought I knew. I had spent my life trying to earn a place at their table, never realizing that the table was rotten to the core. Now, as the owner of the restaurant approached, her eyes locked onto mine with a secret understanding, I felt the tide begin to turn. The hunt wasn't over, it was just moving into its final, most revealing stage. I looked at my mother and whispered, "I think it's time we ask the owner what she thinks of this bill." The air on the terrace turned to ice as Elowen's heels clicked against the marble, a rhythmic countdown to the moment my family's world would shatter. I sat there, my hands steady on the leather folder, but inside, a storm was brewing. I flipped through the debt assumption agreement they were so eager for me to sign, but my eyes caught something tucked behind the main page. There were secondary bank statements, documents I wasn't supposed to see. My blood ran cold as I recognized my own social security number printed clearly at the top. Next to it was a signature, a bold, sweeping imitation of my own handwriting on a series of predatory loans. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My brother Baldrick had not just asked for help, he had committed felony-level identity theft. Under the cold, calculating direction of Eileen, they had spent months funneling money into Vanguard Manufacturing by using my credit as a sacrificial lamb. They didn't just want $5 million tonight. They had already stolen my reputation and my financial future a long time ago. I looked at my father, Reginald, whose forehead was slick with sweat. He knew. He knew the exit strategy involved throwing his youngest son into a federal prison to save his failing vanity. "Gray, just sign the damn papers," Baldrick hissed, his eyes darting around the terrace. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the folder. I simply extended a finger and gently tapped the forged signature on the second page. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize my own hand, Baldrick? Or did you just think I was too insignificant to fight back?" The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant, mocking hum of the Houston skyline. Looking back now, I should have realized that a cornered animal is most dangerous when it thinks it has nothing left to lose. Seeing that I wouldn't be intimidated by the documents, Jocelyn and Baldrick shifted their attack to the only thing I truly valued. They began to mock my personal life, their voices dripping with a high society poison. They laughed about my secret wedding plans, calling me a fool for turning my back on the family name to associate with nobodies. Aileen pulled up a grainy photo on her phone, a picture of Elowen and me sharing a quiet moment at a park. She laughed, her voice like a jagged shard of glass. "A gold-digging waitress, Gray? Honestly, I thought you had more pride than to pick a charity case from the gutters of Houston." I felt a protective fury rise within me, but I kept it locked behind a mask of stoicism. I thought of the night I had been hospitalized with a severe fever, and how Elowen had sat in a plastic chair for 10 hours without sleeping. My family hadn't even called to check if I was breathing. Wealth is not measured by the numbers in a bank account, but by the loyalty of those who stand by you when the lights go out. I looked at my mother and smiled, a genuine, sad smile that seemed to catch her off guard. Have you ever realized that the people you are trying to impress are the ones least worthy of your time? You judge her world by the size of her wallet, Eileen, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a hammer. But she judged mine by the size of my heart. That is why she is richer than everyone at this table combined. Jocelyn rolled her eyes, but Reginald looked away, unable to meet the gaze of the son he was actively betraying. It was a total moral bankruptcy, a collapse of the blood bond that no amount of money could ever repair. I felt the last lingering threads of my childhood loyalty finally snap under the weight of their cruelty. Eileen leaned in, her perfume thick and oppressive. She gave me her final ultimatum. Sign the debt assumption and accept the forgery as a gift to the family, or they would report me for the very fraud they had committed. It was a move so diabolical it felt almost surreal. We have the connections, Gray. No one will believe the drifting son over the Whitmore legacy. Even now, with the knife at my throat, I offered her a hand. Meh, I would have paid off every cent of Vanguard's debt for a single honest, I love you. But you chose a lie over your own blood. I stood up, my shadow stretching across the table like a judge's gavel. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the evidence of their crimes. I could see Elowen entering the terrace now, her silhouette commanding the entire room. She didn't look like a waitress or a charity case. She looked like the storm that was about to break over their polished, hollow world. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment my life truly began. The moment I stopped being a character in their story and started writing my own. The general manager of L'Eclipse was already moving toward her, his posture one of absolute deference. The trap my family had set was about to snap shut, but not on me. I looked at the forged signatures one last time before closing the folder for the final time. I had spent years being the soft one, the one who took the hits and kept on smiling. But tonight, the smiling was over. I was finally ready to show them that the person they had tried to erase was the only one with the power to write their ending. I turned my back on the table and looked at the approaching Elowen, then spared one last glance for the people who shared my name, but not my soul. You wanted to know who I've been spending my time with, I said, my voice cold and clear. Let's see if you can afford her prices. The rhythmic countdown of Elowen's heels was the only sound left in the world, and I knew that once she reached this table, the version of Gray Whitmore they thought they could control would be gone forever. The city lights of Houston flickered below us like dying embers, pale and insignificant compared to the cold fire rising in my chest. I looked at the $5 million debt agreement one last time. Slowly, with a hand that didn't tremble, I slid the folder across the white linen. I pushed it away, distancing myself from the poison they had tried to inject into my future. I looked at Eileen, my mother. I didn't feel the blinding rage I had expected. Instead, I felt a weary clarity, the kind that hurts more than anger ever could. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, but the realization that I was the only one who still valued our blood. Baldric sneered, his face twisting into a mask of pure entitlement. He grabbed a gold pen from his pocket and tried to force it into my hand. Don't be a coward, Gray. Sign it, and be a Whitmore for once in your life. I didn't flinch. I reached out and gently but firmly caught my brother's wrist. The surprise in his eyes was almost comical. He had spent his life thinking I was the soft one, never realizing that I had spent my years building real muscle in a world he only pretended to understand. A tree does not owe its fruit to the woodcutter who refuses to water its roots. I was willing to be your son for free, Mother, I said, my voice quiet but filling the entire terrace like a sudden chill. But I will not be your scapegoat for $5 million. I'm done paying for sins I didn't commit. I turned my gaze toward Reginald. My father couldn't even look at me. He just stared at the skyline as if it held an escape route. I don't hate you for being desperate, Dad. I pity you for thinking my love was a commodity you could trade on a balance sheet. From this moment on, the Whitmore debt is no longer my burden to carry. That was when the rhythmic clicking of heels began to echo against the marble floor. Elowen approached the table with the grace of a woman who had never known a day of inferiority. She was dressed in charcoal silk, a gown that spoke of old-world elegance and quiet authority. Eileen, blinded by her own arrogance, didn't even stand up. She looked at Elowen as if she were a high-end server who had lost her way. "We're in the middle of a private family matter," Eileen snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "Go find a manager and tell them to clear this terrace. This intruder is interrupting us." Jocelyn let out a sharp, mocking laugh that grated against my nerves. "Is this the VIP you mentioned, Gray? Did you pick her up at a temp agency to play the role of a fiancé?" I didn't respond to the insult. Instead, I stood up slowly, not to defend Elowen. She didn't need my defense, meant to honor her. I took her hand and kissed it, a gesture of profound respect that stunned the table into a momentary, suffocating silence. "You wanted to ask the owner about the bill, Aileen. You wanted to talk about who belongs in a place like this. Well, the owner is finally here." The general manager of L'Eclipse suddenly appeared, his face pale and his posture nearly bent in half with deference. He didn't even acknowledge Aileen's existence. He bowed deeply toward Elowen, his voice trembling slightly. "Madam CEO, my deepest apologies. We didn't realize you were dining on the terrace this evening. Shall I have the staff move your party to the founder's suite immediately?" The table went deathly quiet. Aileen's hand froze midair, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of shock. Have you ever seen the exact moment a person realizes their entire world is built on a lie? I looked at my mother, a sharp, intelligent glint finally returning to my eyes. "Eileen, Reginald, I'd like you to meet Elowen. She doesn't just run this restaurant. She owns the investment group that holds the lease on every building you see from this terrace." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a legacy shattering into 1,000 pieces of worthless glass. Elowen looked down at the debt agreement on the table, her eyes scanning the forged signatures with the clinical precision of a shark. She recognized the predatory terms instantly, terms her own compliance team usually flagged for criminal investigation. "Our legal team will need to review this forgery, Gray," Elowen said, her voice like ice. She didn't look at my family. She spoke to me as if they were already ghosts. "Identity theft is a felony in the state of Texas. I won't have my fiancé's family engaging in criminal activity on my property." Baldrick's face turned the color of ash. He tried to speak, to stammer out an excuse, but no words came. I didn't realize it then, but watching them wither under the truth was more exhausting than it was satisfying. Sometimes, winning just means you're the last one standing in the wreckage. I picked up the leather folder, the weight of it no longer feeling like a threat. "You said this bill would make me a VIP, Mother," I said, my tone as calm as the night air. "But in this house, the only currency that matters is truth. And right now, you're all bankrupt." I saw the realization hit Reginald, the realization that they hadn't just lost a son, they had lost their only chance at survival. They had spent years trying to erase me, only to find that I was the one holding the eraser. It's funny how the loudest people become the quietest when the bill finally comes due. Just then, Baldrick's phone on the table began to vibrate incessantly. He looked down, his eyes widening as he saw a series of high-priority notifications. I knew exactly what they were. I had already set the wheels in motion before I even stepped into the elevator. He looked at me, then at Elowen, his hand trembling as he reached for the device. "What did you do?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Eileen's hand trembled so violently that her wine glass shattered against the table, the red liquid spreading like a stain of truth over her forged documents. The red wine continued to seep into the tablecloth, a silent witness to my mother's crumbling composure. But the vacuum of silence didn't last long. Baldrick, pushed to the edge of his predatory instincts, didn't cave. Instead, his eyes turned feral with a scorched earth desperation that I had seen in failing men many times before. He reached into his coat and slammed a tablet onto the table, the screen glowing with jagged lines of financial data. He wasn't going to crawl. He was going to try to burn the entire building down with me inside it. "You think you're a king just because you're standing next to a rich woman, Gray?" Baldrick snarled, his voice rising enough to draw the attention of the surrounding tables. He began scrolling through a series of doctored wire transfer logs, his fingers shaking with panic-fueled malice. He loudly accused me of embezzling millions from Vanguard Manufacturing over the last decade to fund my quote-unquote secret life. He claimed I had manipulated the books to buy Elowen's affection. He even threatened to call the Houston PD, waving a digital copy of a sworn affidavit from a former accountant I knew had been on his payroll for years. I'll make sure your fiancé sees you in handcuffs before the dessert menu even arrives. He spat, his face inches from mine. I didn't flinch. I sat there with a stoic calm that seemed to infuriate him further. I thought of the old proverb, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. I looked at Eileen, who was nodding in support of Baldrick's lies, her face a mask of bitter hope. In that moment, I felt the final cord of familial duty snap. Looking back now, I realize that the most dangerous people aren't the ones who hate you, but the ones who need your destruction to feel safe. Reginald leaned forward, his voice a pathetic whimper of legal extortion. Just confess, Gray. Sign the debt assumption and we can make these charges go away. It's for your own good. It was a staggering betrayal. I looked at my father with a gaze that was both forgiving and final. He was a man who had traded his soul for a name, and now he was trying to trade mine to keep it. I realized then that you cannot bargain with people who have already decided you are the enemy. Integrity is telling yourself the truth, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through Baldrick's desperate noise like a cold wind. And the truth is, you didn't just lose your company tonight, you lost your souls trying to save it. You cannot blackmail a man who owns the evidence of your own crimes. I offered Baldrick one last warning, a small gesture of mercy he didn't deserve. Stop now. For the sake of the name Mom loves so much, don't force me to show the world what's really behind that curtain. But he was too far gone to listen. Elowen stepped forward then, her presence acting like a physical weight that silenced the table. She wasn't just my fiancée in that moment. She was a lioness protecting her pride with a clinical, icy composure. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply placed a slim digital file on the table, the real, unedited logs of Vanguard's offshore diversions that she had secured months ago. Your logs are amateurish, Baldrick, she said softly. My firm specializes in forensic accounting. We've been watching your embezzlement for a long time. It just wasn't Gray doing it. It was you. The momentum of professional justice is a relentless thing once it starts. Elowen signaled her security team, and two men in dark suits stepped into the perimeter of our terrace. She handed Reginald a physical folder, but it wasn't a bill this time. It was a formal notice of default and immediate asset seizure. The look on my father's face was one of total, hollow shock. Have you ever seen a man realize he is standing on a trap door he built himself? It's a sight that stays with you. My investment group purchased the underlying mortgage of the Whitmore estate and the corporate debt of Vanguard Manufacturing 6 hours ago, Elowen announced. Under the bad actor clause of the Texas Finance Code, she was invoking the immediate acceleration of all debts due to the fraudulent activity attempted tonight. In the United States, these clauses are the ultimate weapon against corporate greed. By trying to frame me, they had triggered their own foreclosure. It was a perfect legal irony that left them speechless. Elowen turned her gaze toward Eileen, who looked smaller than I had ever seen her. You asked for a VIP experience, Mrs. Whitmore. My security will now escort you to the curb. Your keys to the Post Oak mansion were deactivated as of 8 p.m. tonight. Baldrick's phone began to chime with a series of high-priority alerts from his bank, notifying him of an immediate freeze on all corporate and personal assets. He looked like he was about to vomit. I didn't realize it then, but the silence of a collapsing ego is the loudest sound in the world. As the blood drained from Baldrick's face, I realized that the hardest part wasn't taking everything they had. It was realizing they never had anything worth keeping. I felt a vibration in my own pocket, a high-priority alert from my legal team. I looked at the family that had tried to erase me and stood up. There's one more thing you didn't check, I said, my voice steady and devoid of malice. You were so busy looking at Elowen's portfolio that you never asked who funded her last acquisition. You never asked who gave her the capital to buy your lives. The city lights below seemed to dim as the internal light of the family's vanity finally flickered and went out. A heavy, agonizing silence settled over the VIP terrace of L'Eclipse, a weight so thick it felt like the air itself had turned to lead. Reginald, the man I once viewed as an immovable mountain of authority, looked small. His shoulders hunched, his hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the table, and the facade of the powerful patriarch crumbled right before my eyes. He didn't scream anymore. He didn't demand. He looked at me with a pathetic desperation that made my heart ache, not with joy, but with a profound sorrow for the man he could have been. Gray, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. Talk to her. Talk to Elowen. We're family. We share the same blood. You can't let her do this to us. Think of the legacy. Think of everything I built for you. It was a desperate plea, using the very blood bond they had tried to weaponize against me only moments ago as a bargaining chip for his survival. I watched him, my expression unreadable. I gently reached out and wiped a spilled drop of red wine from the white linen, a small, quiet metaphor for cleaning up their mess one last time. Looking back now, I realize that the truth will set you free, but first, it will make you miserable. I spoke softly, my voice carrying a weight that forced them to listen. You taught me that a man is only as good as his word, Dad, but you forgot that a man's word is only as good as his heart. I didn't take your house. I didn't take your company. Your choices did that. I was just the one who stopped catching you when you jumped. Reginald flinched as if I'd slapped him. I understood then that their misery was a necessary step. It was the only way they would ever see the reality of the hollow world they had created. Have you ever noticed how the people who demand the most loyalty are often the ones who offer the least? Baldric, unable to handle the silence, let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. It doesn't matter. We don't need her. We'll just find another anonymous investor, Reginald. The one who has been floating our payroll and covering my debts for 5 years. They clearly see the value in the Whitmore name, even if our own brother is a traitor. He looked around the table, seeking validation for his delusion. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. It was time to pull back the final curtain. It was time for the deep shock they never saw coming. I slowly reached into my jacket and pulled out my secondary phone, the one I used only for high-level, encrypted business transactions. I placed it in the center of the table, the screen glowing with a series of private ledger entries that detailed every dollar that had flowed into Vanguard Manufacturing since 2020. You've been looking for your savior, Baldric, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden stillness of the terrace. Well, he's been sitting right across from you, waiting for you to notice he was there. The color drained from Baldric's face as he scrolled through the logs. He saw his own gambling debts paid off by an LLC he didn't recognize. He saw Jocelyn's boutique funding, marked as a private grant. He saw the payroll injections that kept the factory doors open when the banks had already turned their backs. The anonymous savior was never a bank, never a distant partner, and certainly never a fan of the Whitmore name. It was my own private holding company. I had been the one holding the damn table up for 5 long years while they used it as a platform to mock me. You spent years calling me the errand boy, Gray, the soft one, the one who wasn't built for the real world, I said, leaning forward until I could see the sweat on Baldric's brow. You never realized that every meal you ate, every suit you wore, and every lie you told was funded by the person you refused to give a chair to tonight. I wasn't giving them gifts, I was buying their debt. Under Texas law, I was no longer just their son. I was their sole secured creditor. I had the absolute legal right to liquidate every asset they possessed to recoup my investments. I didn't just own the restaurant, I owned their very lives. Eileen tried to speak, her voice trembling with the sudden, bone-chilling realization that she had destroyed her only lifeline. She reached out toward my hand, but I pulled it back, a boundary made of iron. Gray, honey, I didn't know. We can fix this. We can be a family again. I stood up, placing my hand firmly on Elowen's shoulder. She stood with me, a silent pillar of strength. I looked at my mother, and for the first time, I didn't see a queen. I saw a woman who had taught me that family was a transaction, and who was now horrified to find the balance was zero. I forgave you for the seat you didn't give me, Eileen, I said, the words feeling heavy in the night air. I even forgave you for the bill you tried to trap me with. But I cannot forgive you for teaching me that love has a price tag, because once you put a price on love, it isn't love anymore. It's just business. I took the $5 million forgery document that Baldric had been so proud of and handed it back to him. He took it with a shaking hand, looking at it as if it were a death warrant. I'm not calling the police, Baldric, not because I'm your brother, but because I refuse to let your crimes define my wedding week, I said, my tone clinical and final. But by tomorrow morning, you will sign over your remaining shares to the employees' pension fund. You will step down, and you will disappear from the board. If you don't, I let the SEC take over, and I promise you, they won't be as bow dung as I am. I turned away from the table, the hum of Houston feeling like a song of liberation. I was the only one holding this table up. Now, I'm letting go. As we walked away, Elowen and I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the wreckage. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I had done what I came to do. I had given them a chance, and they had chosen their own destruction. Reginald's phone buzzed on the table behind us, a final, automated notification. It was a total buyout offer for the remnants of Vanguard Manufacturing, sent from my legal alias. The offer was for exactly $1. It was the true market value of a legacy built on lies. I didn't realize it then, but walking away was the loudest thing I had ever done. I didn't look back as their world crumbled into the silence of the terrace, because I was finally walking toward a horizon that didn't require me to carry their shadows. The first light of dawn began to bleed across the Houston skyline, turning the cold steel of the skyscrapers into pillars of molten gold. I stood on my balcony, the morning air crisp and tasting of salt and new beginnings. 1 week had passed since the night at L'Eclipse, but it felt like a lifetime. The chaotic noise of that terrace, the accusations, the forged documents, the shattered glass, was now nothing more than a muffled echo in the back of my mind. In its place was the orderly, beautiful silence of a life that finally belonged to me. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the heat anchor me to the present. Looking back now, I realized that the loudest thing a man can ever do is simply walk away. On the mahogany table behind me lay the final legal reports from my counsel. Vanguard Manufacturing had officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The Whitmore family's house of cards had finally collapsed under the suffocating weight of its own vanity. Under U.S. bankruptcy law, the restructuring was no longer in my father's desperate hands. It was in the hands of the trustees. Specifically, a group of trustees I silently controlled through a network of shell companies. I had ensured that the rank-and-file employees, the people who actually did the work, were protected. But as for the executive family members, their power had been stripped away with the stroke of a federal judge's pen. Success, I've learned, isn't about how many people you can command or how much noise you can make in a room. It's about how many toxic people you no longer have to answer to. For 32 years, I had measured my worth by their approval. I had been the soft son who carried their debts and swallowed their insults, hoping that one day they would see the man standing right in front of them. But as the sun climbed higher, I understood that they were never looking for a sun. They were looking for a safety net. And once the net is gone, the only thing left for them to do is fall. A final notification pulsed on my phone. It was a message from Eileen. There was no sneer in her tone this time, no high society poison. It was a jagged, pathetic plea for a loan to keep the Post Oak mansion from being liquidated by the bank. I looked at a trust fund document I had prepared months ago, a modest, non-negotiable stipend for my parents' basic needs. It provided enough for a quiet life and a comfortable condo, but it gave them zero access to corporate power or luxury credit. Charity starts at home, but respect starts with a boundary. I signed the trust and closed my laptop for the final time. I didn't feel rage as I hit the delete button on their contact information. I felt a profound sense of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick, and I was finally choosing my health over their history. Have you ever reached the point where you realize that forgiveness doesn't mean giving them a seat back at your table? It just means giving up the hope that the past could have been any different. I have forgiven them for the chairs they didn't give me, but I have also outgrown the need to sit with them. The glass door behind me slid open with a soft hiss. Elowen joined me on the balcony, wrapping a silk robe around her shoulders to guard against the morning chill. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She simply placed her hand over mine, the one wearing the ring I had finally given her the morning after the storm had passed. Her presence was the only anchor I needed now. We had spent years building something in the shadows, and now we were ready to step into the light. The profunda bond of a chosen family is 1,000 times stronger than one of shared blood that lacks shared respect. "It's done," I whispered, the words drifting away on the Houston breeze. I revealed my final move to her. I had sold my remaining Houston holdings. We were moving our headquarters to Nashville for a new project with Marcus Bell. I wasn't just leaving a restaurant or a house. I was leaving the entire Whitmore shadow behind. I took the old family photo I used to keep in my wallet, the one where I was 10 years old, smiling and hopeful, tucked between two people who were already looking past me. I set it on the patio table, face down. I turned to Elowen, my eyes bright with a future I had built with my own hands and my own integrity. I didn't need their legacy, because I was the legacy. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun was now a blinding, triumphant disk of white fire. For years, I truly believed I was the one missing a seat at their table. I spent every holiday and every birthday feeling like a footnote in someone else's curated life. Now, as the master of my own fate, I realized the truth. I wasn't the one missing a seat. I was the one who owned the building. As the sun fully rose, flooding the penthouse with a light so bright it felt like a benediction, my phone buzzed one last time on the table. It was a notification of a new beginning, a blank slate in a new city where no one would know me as the weak son. I didn't even pick it up. I didn't need to check the news or the markets. I simply walked back inside with Elowen and closed the heavy glass door on the past. The silence of the penthouse was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of being free. I spent 32 years waiting for an apology I was never going to get. But the day I stopped looking for their approval was the day I truly became a man. Don't waste your life begging for a seat at a table that only feeds on your pain. Build your own kingdom instead. I've shared my journey with you because I know I'm not the only one who has had to walk this path. Have you ever had to choose your own peace over the people who shared your name? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd truly like to hear it.